The war did not just destroy bodies, it remade them. In the crucible of industrial violence, a strange and terrible alchemy occurred. A new breed of priest-physician emerged, part mechanic, part sculptor, part shaman. Their cathedral was the field hospital, reeking of carbolic and gangrene. Their scripture was the surgical manual, slick with blood. Their holy work to take what the machines of war had unmade and make it human again. This was no longer the medicine of the 19th century, the bone saw and the opium tincture. This was bioengineering under fire, a desperate, improvisational science that would give birth to modern trauma care, and in the process, confront the most profound question of all: what is a man when his face is gone? The first truth of the war's medicine was sheer, overwhelming volume. A single major offensive could produce 20,000 casualties in a single hour. Stretcher bearers worked until they collapsed, dragging shattered men across moonscapes of mud and wire. The chain of evacuation from regimental aid post to advanced dressing station to casualty clearing station to base hospital was a conveyor belt of agony, designed not for comfort but for triage, for sorting. The Thomas splint, a simple metal frame for broken femurs, reduced mortality from this injury from 80% to 20% almost overnight. It was a triumph of logistics over complexity. Mobile X-ray units, pioneered by Marie Curie and her daughter Irene, brought the invisible world of shattered bone into the light, allowing surgeons to navigate the internal wreckage. But the great innovation was not a tool, but a system, the anticipatory hospital. Surgeons were placed directly behind the lines, at the casualty clearing stations. The philosophy was radical: intervene immediately. Don't wait for infection to set in during the long journey to the coast. Cut, clean, and stabilize now. This simple relocation of the surgical theater saved countless lives. It also meant surgeons worked in unthinkable conditions, operating for 48 hours straight by hurricane laps, their boots sticking to the wooden floors pooled with blood, the ground shaking from nearby shelling. They became experts in a new taxonomy of injury: the rifle wound, a relatively clean, focused trauma; the shrapnel wound, a horror, a piece of metal, often contaminated with mud and cloth, that ripped, tore, and buried itself deep, sowing infection through tissue. The blast injury, the invisible killer, a concussive wave that could liquefy lungs or cause fatal brain hemorrhage without breaking the skin. And then there was gas. Medicine had no precedent for this. Chlorine created a generation of men who would drown on dry land, their lungs producing a yellow fluid as they desperately tried to breathe. Mustard gas blinded and created monstrous chemical burns. The gas mask was a stopgap. The damage, once done, was a mystery to be managed, not cured. But the true frontier of this medical war was not in saving life, but in reconstructing it. The machine gun and high explosive shell did not merely kill. They unmade the human form with surgical precision. They removed jaws. They sheared away noses. They obliterated cheekbones, leaving craters where faces had been. These men were the gueules cassés, the broken faces. The French term was poetic, almost gentle. The reality was monstrous. They existed in a social and psychological limbo. Too alive to be mourned, too horrifying to be seen. They were hidden away in special wards, like the famous Chamber of Horrors at Queen Mary's Hospital in Sidcup, England. Visitors fainted at the sight of them. They could not eat in public, could not kiss their wives, could not walk down a street without causing panic. Their injury was a life sentence of isolation. Into this void stepped the plastic surgeon, Sir Harold Gillies, a New Zealand otolaryngologist serving with the British Army, saw the future. He established a dedicated hospital at Sidcup. He wasn't just repairing wounds, he was architecting faces. He pioneered the tubed pedicle flapper technique, where he would graft a tube of skin from a patient's chest or forehead, leave it attached at one end to maintain blood supply, and gradually walk it up to reconstruct a nose or cheek over weeks or months. It was slow, painful, medieval in its process, yet dazzlingly innovative. His work was part sculpture, part horticulture, part butchery. He built noses from ribs, eyelids from arm skin, jaws from hip bone. He kept detail before and after plaster casts, a gallery of human ruin and improbable redemption. In Germany, surgeons like Jacques Joseph worked similar miracles. The discipline they founded was not cosmetic, it was psychic salvage. Their goal was to return a man not to beauty, but to legibility, to give him back a face that could be read as human by other humans, allowing him to re-enter the social world. Parallel to this external reconstruction was an internal one, the management of the shattered mind. As episode 4 revealed, shell shock was the crisis. The treatment became a bizarre battleground between punishment and therapy. But some, like Dr. Lewis Yilland in London, practiced a form of brutal, authoritarian healing. He used strong electric shocks, hot plates, and verbal harangues to remagnetize what he saw as hysterical, weak wills. His treatments were exorcisms designed to shock the man back into the obedient soldier he was supposed to be. In stark contrast was the talking cure pioneered by practitioners influenced by Freud, like W.R. Rivers. At Craiglockhart, officers were encouraged to talk, to write, to draw, to give language to the unspeakable. This was not about forcing a man back into the mold of a soldier, but about helping him integrate an experience that had shattered his very self. It was the birth of trauma psychotherapy. Both approaches, the brutal and the gentle, acknowledged a terrifying new reality. The mind could be a casualty. The war had weaponized psychology. This great, bloody laboratory also accelerated medical science in profound, if grim, ways. Blood transfusion moved from dangerous experiment to standardized practice, with sodium citrate used as an anticoagulant to allow for stored blood. The understanding and control infection leaped forward, with the Karoldakin method of continuously irrigating wounds with antiseptic solution. Rehabilitation became a discipline. Men were taught to walk on artificial limbs, to work with prosthetic hooks. Occupational therapy was born from the need to give shattered men a purpose, to retrain them for a civilian world they had left behind. But this progress had a bitter aftertaste. Every advancement felt like a Faustian bargain. They were learning to save lives only because the war was creating an endless supply of broken men to practice on. The science was brilliant, the necessity for it was an abomination. The ultimate alchemy, however, was social. The war's insatiable need for bodies and labor triggered the most profound social reorganization since the Industrial Revolution. Women were not just knitting socks, they were munitionettes, handling toxic TNT that turned their skin yellow canary girls and poisoned their blood. They were driving trams, working as police officers, farming the land, serving as nurses in casualty, clearing stations mere miles from the front, witnessing the horror in its rawest form. Their competence was undeniable, their contribution total. The war proved, irrevocably, that the Victorian idea of separate spheres was a fiction. In 1918, Britain granted the vote to women over 30. The genie of female emancipation could not be put back in the bottle. The class system trembled. In the trenches, the working-class Tommy and the aristocratic officer died in the same mud. The myth of upper-class inherent superiority was harder to maintain when a mill worker's savvy kept a platoon alive and a duke's son died from a foolish, chivalric stunt. A new, weary egalitarianism of shared suffering was born in the filth, and the very relationship between the state and the individual was rewritten. The government now controlled food rationing, industry conscription of factories, labor conscription of men, and information propaganda and censorship. The total war state was born a leviathan that could reach into every home and every life. The individual citizen became a resource of the state, as surely as coal or steel. By 1918, the human being had been redefined. The war proved the body was a machine that could be disassembled and, with great effort, partially reassembled. It proved the mind was a landscape that could be shelled into a wasteland and could, with great care, begin a fragile regrowth. It proved society was not a natural order, but a contingent arrangement that could be melted down and recast in the furnace of necessity. The alchemists of flesh, the surgeons, the nurses, the psychiatrists, the social reformers had worked miracles, but their miracles were a condemnation. They were proof of the unprecedented scale of the wound that had been inflicted. They had learned to put men back together. But they could not answer the question that hung over every reconstructed face, every haunted mind, every transformed society. What do you do with a world that is now expert at repairing the damage it is even more expert at creating? The war forced a leap in human knowledge in surgery, psychiatry, and social engineering born from the desperate need to repair what industrial violence had unmade. Today, what terrifying leaps in artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and behavioral science are being accelerated not by our curiosity, but by our new, silent wars in cybersecurity, information warfare, and geopolitical disruption? What are we learning to rebuild, only because we are first becoming so devastatingly skilled at breaking it?